nerds, kicking off the Sales for Nerd podcast. If you feel more comfortable with SQL than sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than in shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this podcast is for you. I spent a long time learning these lessons the hard way, and I want to help you learn them the easy way by sharing my experiences and by talking with other brilliant tech people who figured out how to hack not just the code, but the sales and marketing process as well. The main thing I struggle with that I want to help other people avoid is the notion that technical people can't be good at sales and marketing, that unless you're some kind of extroverted football captain who's been in sales for years, you're not going to be good at it. Being a quote-unquote technical person is about solving problems, technical problems. When you start your own business or you have to sell, you're still solving problems. You just have to solve the business problem. I think the mindset of problem solving is far more important than the technical business part. No different, only different in your mind, as Yoda would say. This podcast is a little different, though, in that while we discuss these serious issues, we're also going to share some wine and talk about the wine. And this time we're going to have a slight twist that I'll get to in a second after I introduce my guest, Joe Williamson. Joe is a partner at Alloy Partners, helping companies go to market with better user experience and design, go-to-market strategy, and so on. And they work with some of the biggest companies in the world, folks like GE and Dell, names you've heard of like PayPal, and a lot of smaller companies, including startups. This breadth of experience, combined with Joe's background and training, he actually started his career mentoring kids as part of the Princeton Review, and also did corporate training along with startup mentoring, and he worked with 90 new businesses over 3 years, is really what made me excited to have him on the podcast today. He's a believer in data, and he's got it. And there's one interesting twist here. Joe does not drink. So rather than take that as a stumbling block, we've turned that into a fun experiment. One of the experiments I've wanted to do for a long time is to test how wine is going to open under different scenarios. So we've got one bottle here of Bordeaux, chosen because it's probably a little bit musty when you open it. I'm going to open it now. And then Joe is going to pour it into 3 different glasses in 3 different ways, and we'll get into that in a second. But I won't know which is which, and then I will be my own guinea pig, and we'll see if we can tell the difference. So Joe, thanks for coming. Thanks for being patient with me. Thanks for agreeing to be part of this crazy experiment.
Sure, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So we need to get right to this, and this is extremely selfish because not only am I not sharing any wine with you, I'm not even really asking you any questions yet except to pour one bottle or pour one glass just normally, pour one through, it's called this Venturi thing. It's like a little funnel that's supposed to aerate the wine really quickly. And then I've got just a simple straw, and we're going to try pouring a glass with that and just stirring it and seeing if that helps with the aeration. And if you could go easy, because I've got to drive home after this interview. So sure, I'm gonna turn my back now, and Joe's gonna pour and arrange.
All right.
If I was one of those ninja people with super good hearing, I might be able to tell.
I'm actually not sure how much to pour. I think that's enough.
Do I want to know? That sounds like an awful lot. So
might be too much.
Like this much. You can always take some out of that and pour it through the other things.
We'll see.
All right. It sounds really bad.
Yeah. Actually, there may be a challenge with, we'll see. Create a lot of bubbles.
I was a little worried about that. So we might have to...
I think it'll be fine. They're going away.
As you mentioned about the bubbles, there are some flaws with this experimental design that, maybe we should have used some opaque glasses or something like that.
Sure.
There's a lot of things that
actually, it looks like it's working out okay.
Okay. Bubbles are going down?
Yeah, they're dissipating with time. Alright. I only got 1 drop on my knee.
Okay.
So you'll need to give it a minute longer. If you want to go ahead and start talking, we could.
All right.
We need to give it a few minutes to let the bubbles get away.
Okay, so my eyes are closed. I'm going to try to keep them closed as long as possible. And let's start off, Joe, by telling folks about how you got into sales in the first place.
I'm like most most analytical people on accident. Came into it kind of backwards. The first real sales experience I had was really at Princeton Review. When I was in college, I started teaching LSAT classes. Eventually got trained on teaching GMAT, GRE, MCAT, SAT, ACT, TOEFL. And after graduation, I had an opportunity to actually work at managing a Princeton Review site. And that was my first time to do sales, when students would come in thinking about signing up and kind of talking them through that process and either getting them to sign up for classes or not, which was kind of fun since I actually understood the process being a teacher as well. It was interesting to walk people through that and help them make decisions.
And how
excuse me.
How did that go? Did you think of it as I'm now doing sales?
No, not at all. I actually had a huge aversion to sales. I thought I was a used car salesman, and it was something I didn't want to have anything to do with. I think you can open your eyes now.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. All right. So I don't know which one is which. We've got three rather healthy pores here, Joe.
Well, I realized that after the fact.
We'll have to see what we can do.
Apologize for that.
No, it's rough. I'll have to just be careful. There's no longer Uber in town, but there's always alternatives.
Yes.
So you didn't realize you were doing sales?
Yes.
Or you didn't think of it as sales? What did you think of it as?
I just thought of it as helping people. So you're trying the first?
I'm trying glass number 3.
All right.
Tastes nice. A little woody.
A little countdown going on.
Now 2. Seems a little bit more astringent. And 1. This is a deep puzzle.
Well, continue enjoying.
My hypothesis is that 3 is the Venturi. It seems the least biting, but I really can't tell much difference. I feel like we need a master sommelier or someone who can really run this test.
But there isn't one walking through this door.
There is not one walking through this door, right? So I'll have to... They're all quite drinkable, and I feel like they will all be better in half an hour. But I can't tell the difference between 1 and 2. I feel like 3 is different, and who knows? Maybe it's just because there's less in there, and there's something about the aroma. Like I said, there's a lot of flaws in this experiment that probably mean we'll have to repeat it.
Right, several times.
Right, to get statistical significance. So,
right. So
going back to the Princeton Review days, you just thought it was helping people.
Yeah, for me, I really enjoyed the process of teaching. I like the process of working with students, and so if I could place them in a class, especially if I was teaching, I thought it was fun to see is it a fit for them or not. There are a lot of things that are really surprising in the process, though. One of the things that I go back to consistently since then is that we'd have students come in and they check out Kaplan and they come by Princeton Review and say, I'm looking at an LSAT class. What's the difference between, Princeton Review and Kaplan? And I could go into all sorts of detail about how we spent so much more on R&D. We changed our courses more often. The things we focused on were really more intelligently organized. But none of that seemed to make any difference because I was talking a language that they couldn't really understand or interpret. Am I telling the truth or am I kind of just positioning? And then I always ended with or the first time I did this I was surprised, but I ended with a comment of just like, well, we're $100 more than they are and our classes are full. And the first time I said that, a student immediately just said, oh, I'll sign up then. Handed me the money, signed up for the course, and they were in. And I was like, that's weird. And so the next person, I went through that whole explanation and got to the end, tried that same line again of, we're $100 more and we're full. And they signed up as well. And so ultimately I started dropping the whole more scientific explanation. I just started telling people that of just like, well, do whatever you want, but we're $100 more and we're full. And people kept signing up.
And so all the stuff that was the internally focused reason why you were better was something that they couldn't understand. It would be like my doctor saying, you should really use this heart valve that's better. I wouldn't know the difference.
Right. And getting into the technical details. Right.
You're like, this one's more expensive and everyone wants it. Then
right.
I'd be like, oh, get me that one.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one I want.
Well, that's a good example of a heart valve because in this case, the calculus that was going on in their heads, they're thinking about this is my future and I need somebody to help me. Who do I feel like is going to provide the best service? And if they're anxious, they naturally will gravitate towards the one that costs the most, just feeling like it's the most comprehensive. And the same thing with a heart valve or a medical procedure. You might think, well, if I can get the heart valve that's $5,000 or $50,000, I'm going to go for the 50,000 one because I'd rather not die.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to evaluate the difference.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that's hard, especially when you get into technical stuff where only very few people can actually evaluate the true technical merits. A lot of times even the experts are guessing because they don't have data yet unless it's really new, or especially if it's new, right? You don't necessarily know which approach is really going to be better. Mm-hmm. You can offer your reasons, but the reasons may not make sense to a non-expert. Mm-hmm. Or they just sound like, and half the time they may be very well intentioned, and half the time they may accidentally sound like some snake oil salesman who said the same thing in the last meeting without actually being truthful. Right. So a lot of people get confused and turned off, and you were able to accidentally distill it into this really compelling message, which I think is great.
Right. And, it's funny, it was actually Princeton Review's pricing, their strategy was actually, from the beginning, they took Kaplan's prices and just added $100. They did that for every course that they offered. They didn't bother trying to come up with a scientific evaluation internally. They just said, we're better, and we're going to signal out to everybody that we're better. And it's pretty effective.
So I feel like almost we could just shut this podcast down right now because this is the thing that drives me more crazy than anything else. People, they start their business and they say, we're better than whomever it is, the big company they're competing with, but we're new and blah, 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 so we have to be cheaper. And then they go out and they struggle and they get down on themselves and they get beaten up and they end up just going cheaper and cheaper. And a lot of them drive themselves out of business that way, as opposed to we're new and we may not be for everyone, but we are better for whomever we are targeted at. And I think the strategy of we're just going to be more expensive than the comparison point as a signal of value is so brilliant. I'm almost worried whatever we say is not going to be as valuable as that. So if you're listening to this, take notes. If you're in your car, pull over and write it down. If you're jogging or biking or whatever, pause it and leave yourself a voicemail, because this is really, like, that one thing alone is going to be super useful if you're not already doing it.
Yeah, I find that for especially analytical people, they struggle with this concept, and I do as well. Like, I would rather be, they say be better, cheaper, or faster. I'd rather be all three. But if you're in the market, especially for any type of good or service that is not easily understandable by the customer, it's not a commodity.
Right.
If it's something like, grain, like there's no difference, or or it's very easy to tell the difference. Or that might be crude oil. Like they have ways of defining this stuff. But as you get away from these very easily defined goods and it becomes uncertain, that's where you have to really be empathetic with what a customer experiences. I mean, for me, I think I often recommend people go do something that's very unfamiliar, do a shopping experience that's unfamiliar. A great one, if you don't know camping well, is go to REI. They have helpful salespeople, and they always have like a range of options. But you can do this as well with all sorts of really, like going to the mall and just wandering to a store you don't know. And they'll generally be able to give you a low price option, a medium price option, a high price option. And you want to find something you really cannot evaluate the difference. You don't know very well.
Right.
For me, I didn't grow up camping. I'm not a camper. If I go in and I'm going to go stay in a tent, and they're like, here, 3 tents. This one's, the smaller one. There's the big one, medium price one. I'm not going to feel comfortable walking out with the cheap one because I just don't know that it's actually going to work well enough.
Right.
And so you get that anxiety that builds up in you of like, I don't know that I can pull the trigger on this. But the high price one, you're like, well, I kind of want that, but am I really willing to pay for it? But it puts itself in this category of like, this is sort of the deluxe version. And then there's that middle price one that in those scenarios often somewhat gravitate towards, but then it really depends on what you're doing. If it's a tent and you're going to go camping and you're really not sure and you really don't want it to go badly, you're probably getting the high price one because you don't want to end up with getting rained on in the middle of the night and that's how you wake up. It might be different if it's something that's less critical to your trip,
right.
but those critical things, you're like, I want to get uncertainty out of this. I don't want it to fail. Right. And that's where you end up at that high price option. So often with things that are uncertain, especially in an area that creates anxiety in the customer, they're going to gravitate towards that higher price, more secure, less risk solution.
Yep. I think that's a great point. And I think another sort of building on this pricing conversation, having that sort of small, medium, large, good, better, best, whatever it is super helpful. And even if you don't really have a best in your quiver, create one. Mm-hmm. Right? Create one that is, if you could do whatever you want for this customer that you think would be the most helpful thing you could possibly do, what would it be? Mm-hmm. And just offer that as an anchor point. Mm-hmm. Right? This is the tent you take up Everest.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not want to do that, but it makes your I'm going to go camping for the weekend tent look very affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Makes them understand that you can go further if you need to. And sometimes people surprise you like, that's what I need. I need to go to Everest and I'm willing to pay for it. And you might have just tripled or 10x'd your profit on that one deal.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the flip side of that, though, that I think is really important, profit is incredibly important. Especially for analytical audience, I find that there's often this feeling of like, I want to make sure I provide enough value. And if I don't want to charge them for the same thing, I don't want to charge more without really delivering more value. One of the truism I've learned in consulting is that anytime you're unhappy with a customer or frustrated by a customer, you're just not charging them enough. And it's very true, but in another way of looking at it, if you charge enough, you'll focus enough on that client. Mm-hmm. And if a client pays you too much, it's your job, or in a way too much, it's your job to ensure that that experience goes incredibly well, and that everything that you can do to make that their outcome as profitable as possible for them, you'll do.
Right.
And so it may be that, in the tent example, if somebody overpays a bit for a tent from you, that you then go on the trip with them and help them set it up, or right. whatever that next step or that other level of service is that you now can do because you're getting paid enough, that actually makes their experience so much better.
Here's a free rain tarp or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, it could be more product. In a lot of cases, I think it's more service. And sure. Right. And ensuring that that the experience goes well. And it's about tapping in and understanding what your customers really worry about, what they're really hiring you to do. And in most cases, they're hiring you to reduce their risk. They're hiring you to make sure that things don't go badly, way more so than that things do go well. It's very rare, I find, in a consulting environment, it's very rare to find customers that say, I want a moonshot, I want things, I hope they go really well, and if they don't, right. Too bad, right? It's almost always, I'm really worried this is going to go terribly, I might lose my job, I might, the company might go under, or
right.
There's some terrible negative event that's driving them to act. Like, it's very rare that people act out of greed, they always act out of fear, for the most part. And so you end up in that engagement. And so the more that you can do to provide the security blanket, the more you can do to ensure that they feel safe, secure, and that it actually does go well and you reduce their risk to virtually zero, they're willing to pay for that.
Right. And in the absence of knowing whether the risk is really zero, as you alluded to at the beginning, one of the value indicators they're going to go with is price. Mm-hmm. So you can offer the same service for $100,000 or $10,000. And if it's $1 million problem, they're probably going to take the person asking for $100,000 because they seem like they know what they're talking about and they're not as worried about it going wrong.
Right.
And I think a lot of times people make this assumption when they're small, when they're starting out, especially if they're just kind of getting into this stuff, that by lowering price, they look more attractive to the enterprise buyer. And obviously you can't charge too much, but if you're too expensive, they're going to tell you.
Right.
If you're too cheap, they're just going to dismiss you as not being serious.
Right. Excuse me. One of the key implications of that it's taken me a long time to fully understand is that not only are they looking to minimize risk in that process, but if you charge $10,000 to solve $1 million problem, you also make them look bad. And in most cases, the people you're selling to are in more of a mode of saving face. Especially if they're in a large corporate environment, it's all about how they look and how they're perceived by others. And if they get budget approval for $100,000 to solve this problem, and they only spend 10, then it looks like they didn't understand the problem very well.
Right.
It looks like they weren't really prepared. And if it really is $1 million problem and they solve it for 10,000, maybe they're not competent. Maybe they should have solved it themselves.
Right.
Because the numbers get so small that it's like, really, you couldn't have solved this another way. And it's when it gets to a large enough figure, it starts to be more plausible that they wouldn't have that skill set. The skill set is valuable, that it's reasonable and rational that they don't already possess that skill set.
Right. And if it's $1 million problem, solving it for $100,000 makes sense.
Yeah.
If it's a $50,000 problem, you can't. That's fine. But like you say, they're not necessarily they don't get kudos for saving $90,000.
No,
at all. It's the opposite. Unless
you're dealing with a startup founder, or rarely is it somebody who's hired in, but a true founder of a business will think that way and will value that compressed solution. But not even all of them do think that way. It's very rare to find somebody that thinks of a $10,000 solution as a true win.
Right.
They usually think of it as an indictment of them as a person in a way.
And if you feel bad as someone selling that, you can always say, I'm going to charge you $100,000, but I'm now going to go above and beyond and make it a $2 million win or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
because that will actually be a win for that person and for you.
Yes.
So, you've had this breadth of experience that I think most of us who, they start a company or they're in a company, and I work with a lot of small businesses, but I don't have sort of the data set that you have, if you will, just the experience of helping all these companies get off the ground. What was that like, and what did you learn?
Yeah, so I had a stint where I was a coach, business coach, and startup specialist, if you will, for a franchise company, and helped launch over 100 businesses and helped scale ones that were already out there. It's really interesting to get to look at, over 100 businesses that all have the same business model in different geographic areas in the U.S., but all dealing with the U.S. population and getting wildly different results. You'd have, I think we had roughly 100x difference on a monthly basis between our most successful and least successful in monthly revenue.
Not 10x, 100x.
100x. Yeah. And it's fairly, and you would think, like, when you first are faced with that problem, you start to think, well, maybe this is, geographic difference or time in business or, all these questions that might come up that would, everything except that it's the person in the driver's seat, right? And trying to justify it in all these other ways. And ultimately is that person who's responsible, the business owner, really drives that growth or restricts that growth. The business will grow to the size that the founder is capable of handling, and no bigger and really no smaller.
Okay. And so what were the successful people doing that the unsuccessful people or the middling people weren't doing?
The best way to illustrate that, I had in my first month or two on the job, I had a pair of back-to-back coaching calls that really illustrated the point to me. The first one I called was a guy who was really struggling. I'd been in business for, I think, about 7-8 years, really struggled to catch on and really scale. And then right after that, I called a guy that was in a neighboring territory. They shared a border. This guy was 24 months in and was scaling really fast. So the first guy I called, I was asking him, you're struggling a bit. What's going on? What's limiting your growth? And this was right around 2009, 2008. So financial crisis had hit, and he was in Chicago, and he was like, the financial crisis really, people don't realize this, but it really hit the heartland the hardest. The coast weren't nearly as affected. Chicago's just been absolutely beat up. Customers aren't really willing to pay for anything. They don't value services. They're cutting back staff, and how can I go in and charge them more on top of that? It's really hard to find leads. It's really hard to sell this stuff effectively. And additionally, he's like, when I do charge, I charge a really minimal amount because they don't really have much money to go around. So I have to make my prices as small as possible, or else I just can't sell. And he's like, these problems, it's outside of me, right? It's like, it's the environment that's making this happen.
You felt like the walls were closing in on every dimension.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I called the other guy right afterwards, and I was like, well, you're doing one of the best performing franchises in our system. What's going on? And he was like, oh, really? I had no idea. He was like, I think I screw everything up that I work with. He's like, I just try to get out of my own way. I'm trying to hire really good people, empower them to do their job, and trying not to get too much in the way. And I was like, well, I hear the financial crisis, Chicago apparently has been hit really hard. And he's like, yeah, probably, but I'm sure everywhere has been. And, it's actually good for us because as people have been cutting back and trying to reduce headcount, we have an opportunity to provide outsourced services to replace some of that headcount, especially in a fractional way. And then he went on to say, asked about pricing, and he was like, well, we price what we think is fair. I want to make sure that we have enough money to pay, my employees are great. I want to make sure I can pay them an appropriate wage. I want to make sure that I can provide the service that companies really want. And I really don't want to undercharge them or not provide enough services. And then they have a crisis, and all of a sudden I didn't sell them the right thing to prevent that crisis from happening. And it was just this stark difference. Ultimately, it boiled down to this external locus of control versus internal locus of control. Right? This idea of the environment is so powerful, I'm powerless to do anything versus I'm just trying to help people out and find a way to make things work. And, I cause problems. I need to get out of my own way. I need to find a way to help them, in the process.
So I think even within engineers, right, I come from a computer science background, and there are some people who say, but it doesn't work. I'm stuck. I'm screwed.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say that's not working, and they will do whatever, and they think really outside the box, and whatever it is, they kind of plow through it and they get it done. And I feel like it's almost like they've learned that they can navigate, and there's always a way forward. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even those people, they get out in the business world, and they get stuck the same way that someone else might have got stuck in the technical world. Like, I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. I don't feel in control. I don't know how to exert control or what to do next. The same way, take some guy who was the captain of the football team, who went into sales, is great at sales, but you want him to write a blogging platform or something. They're like, I don't know what to do, right? They're just out of their element. So when you come in and you're kind of a fish out of water like that, how do you regain that sense of control?
I think there are two things. One is having an elastic view of the brain, recognizing that if you're fish out of water right now, but that doesn't mean you will be in 6 months. And if you really dig in and you really try to learn and position yourself as a learner, you can get there. You're just not there today.
Right.
If you get stuck in that fixed mental model where if I don't know it now, I'll never learn it and I'll always be this outsider, I'll always be lost. You just don't spend your time learning and you don't actually get better.
I'm not good at sales. It's never going to change. So
right.
I'm just going to complain about the economy.
Right. And I'm going to check out. I'm not going to recognize that the problem is I need to actually dig in and learn and grow. And I need to be okay being in a space that's hard. I'm not an expert. I don't know what I'm doing. And I need to acknowledge that with myself. And that's usually the hardest step.
Okay.
The second step is reach out for help. There is somebody who knows how to do this. And you can find them, talk to them, share roadmaps, ask for help, but acknowledging that you're in that place that, I like being an expert and I don't feel like an expert right now. Those are powerful words, and you can use that to help get advice, to get help, to get to a place where you're more confident.
I think that's a great point, and I think it's hard for people who have achieved a level of expertise or mastery in one discipline. They now get stretched or they go into a different discipline. Like if you're a chef, but now you're in the restaurant business, that's a different thing. Mm-hmm. And it's almost harder because you're so used to feeling competent and in control and like you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're not used to that feeling of being out of control. But to get to where you were in your area of expertise, it actually took a lot of work that you don't remember as well anymore.
Right.
You kind of lost your beginner's mind.
That's absolutely true. I think it's helpful to think back. Like the beginner's mind is a great way of saying that. Of remembering those areas that you had expertise. You were a learner at one point. You did have no knowledge of that at a certain point.
Right.
Nobody pops out of the womb ready to, as an expert in networking or whatever else, right? It's been learned by everyone. So the way that you got to that point was by climbing that mountain. And you did that really successfully before. And really, I think of myself this way. My biggest strength is my ability to learn, not my mastery of any one particular topic. And so when I think of myself that way and I position myself that way, it means that when I approach a problem and I am, totally out of depth, it doesn't freak me out because I think, okay, this is a good space for me to be. I just need to start climbing, start pushing, and I'll get there eventually.
That makes sense. Now, we're going to take a brief interlude here and just introduce the wine. We've got a bottle of Chateau Raccoon from Bordeaux, and it's a typical Bordeaux blend. We've got 78% Merlot, 12% Cab Franc, and 10% Cab Sauvignon. So it's all opening up kind of nicely, and I'm just going to admit that my palate is not sophisticated enough to know what's going on, and or there isn't enough differentiation between these different techniques of pouring the wine. I'm going to say that glasses 1 and 2, I have no idea what's happening. I suspect one of them was stirred and one was just poured, and I believe 3 was the Venturi, but I could be completely wrong.
Do you want me to tell you?
Now you can tell me.
So the first one I stirred, the second one poured, and the third one was the aeration device.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. So I guess what we would say from that is that the Venturi seems to make a noticeable difference, which does corroborate what I have informally tested at other times as well, but that has not been blinded like this, so that was useful. And that stirring with a straw does not make that much difference. Next time maybe I'll bring my blender and we'll see if that helps. And
I want to point out that Chateau Raccoon this is actually bottled in France. At first, when you said the name, I thought it might be from Tennessee.
Oh, yeah, that's
but
a good
that
point.
Is the French spelling of raccoon.
Yeah, let's spell this. We'll have this in the show notes, but that is RECOUN. Raccoon, Ougne, and there's like lettering over half of it, so it's actually kind of hard to read. But right, it is not raccoon, the small animal. It is some sophisticated French thing that's very different, presumably from the Chateau Raccoon moonshine. Right. But thanks, Joe, for setting up the experiment. This is always interesting.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very easy for wine drinking to get a little too pompous, but it's kind of fun just to do it, and it's fun just to experiment with different things and see what people think about it. This is something that comes up from time to time on these interviews, but kind of goes back to our pricing thing where they have people test wine and they say, this is a $9 bottle of wine, this is a $90 bottle of wine. Mm-hmm. Which one do you like better? And everyone says the $90 bottle when it's the same bottle. Mm-hmm. And they thought, well, they're just saying that to look like they know what they're talking about. And they stuck people in MRI machines, and their brains actually light up differently when they think they're not lying. They actually are enjoying the bottle they think is $90 more than the bottle they think is $9. Mm-hmm. So again, going back to our pricing discussion, sometimes you just want to feel like you're enjoying something that's appropriate.
That's completely true. In my experience with consulting and other companies I've had, when the clients that, at every practice I've ever been a part of, the clients that have paid the most are generally the happiest. Mm-hmm. And the ones that pay the least are the most unhappy.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what services are provided. It's just universally true. Every consulting firm I've talked to, or person that works there, and bring up that same observation, they say the same thing. If you're getting a cut rate deal, you expect that you're getting corners cut, and you expect you're not getting a great deal. And you tend to cause problems. You tend to, not like what comes back and want changes and really push against the consulting firm. When you're paying top dollar, you expect on some level that everything is being taken care of, that everything's being done well, and you just have a better experience. And
you trust when someone says, I think we should do X.
Right.
It feels like it's a more expert opinion. Mm-hmm. Like you're going to Mass General for your heart surgery. You're not going to discount Mexican surgeon or whatever. Yeah. And I've certainly found that to be true in my own consulting experience. And it's something I think about a lot. And it is very hard to differentiate all the different factors that go into that. Because part of it is, if you're charging appropriately, you're happier. Mm-hmm. If you get that call late at night because it's an emergency, and they only call if it's really an emergency, but you're getting paid well and you're really respected, it's so much easier to take that call off hours than the ones who are just a pain in the neck, who are always calling you for no damn good reason, right? And you know that despite however professional you're trying to be, your frustration's got to be shining through, and they're hearing that, and it's going to build and build, versus when you have a great relationship and you pick up the phone and you talk nicely and you inspire confidence and you help them feel good and then they feel good. And it's just, it's hard to tell where that cycle starts, but it's definitely there and it reinforces itself.
Right. There's a buzzword in consulting of trusted advisor. Everyone wants to be the trusted advisor to the business. And there's no such thing as a cut rate trusted advisor. Those first two terms cancel each other out. You can't be cut rate and trusted. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that even though you think you might be doing them a deal, just like you were saying in that experiment with the wine, their brain lights up differently when they're paying more, when they truly are showing the value, or they're making a commitment to the value of that engagement. They have different brain chemistry in the way they think about you and the way they interact with you. And it's biological. It's not a choice. It's not, statistics or luck. It's that they really do interface with you, interact with you, and think of you differently.
And it kind of goes to how we actually make decisions, right? We make most decisions emotionally, and then we pretend that we can backfill the rationale with our very sophisticated brains, but really we made that decision in our gut.
Right.
And I think a lot of times, especially when you take an analytical person, you plunk them into a sales situation, I'd be there with my ROI calculators, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't have enough data. I can't put together a compelling ROI. What do I do, right? The maximum threshold of my ROI is only here, but I feel like I should be charging much more, but I'm in this unknown territory. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the different SAT prep. At the end of the day, if you can actually help the person, you're going to help them much more than you can model in this little calculator before you even started the project and you have no data. So go help them. Don't leave them languishing there. And I think that was part of the problem I had, was feeling like am I taking advantage of someone? Not, this person obviously needs help. And if I don't help them, they will either be stuck in this current situation, or one of these people who is a charlatan is going to go take advantage of them and charge them a bunch of money and not deliver as much value as I'm going to deliver. I need to help them.
And there's another scenario that's dangerous in that as well, that if you don't charge enough and they don't respect you and value you enough, they won't implement what you say, no matter how effective it truly is. I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. I've seen this.
Yep.
You know, the deals that I've done in a cut rate way, in almost every case, they fail to implement, they fail to follow your instructions and directions. They just don't respect it as much. And in a way, you're doing them a major disservice. You know, we were talking the $1 million example where, you know, it's usually $100,000. You just count it to $50,000 because whatever. And then you give them this great solution and they don't implement it. They don't save the $1 million. They're now down $50,000.
Right.
Because they didn't trust you. They didn't give you enough credibility to actually step in and do what you needed to do. The one that you charged $100,000 to that did implement it well, they saved the $1 million, and now they're up $900,000.
Right.
So there's really you're essentially charging them $1 million to save $50,000.
Right.
And it's just not effective. It's not worth it. If they're not going to view you as a valued contributor to their team, and if they need to push you on price to that point where you're really caving, they don't really value what you're providing, and they're probably not going to implement it. And it's worth pushing back with them on that. Of like, you know, you say that you have this big problem. You think that I'm the right solution, but then you're telling me you don't want to pay me anything. Do you just not believe that problem is real? Do you not plan on implementing this? You know, because I don't want to spend my time providing solutions that aren't implemented.
Right.
It just feels like a giant waste of time, and it's very emotionally taxing. I'd much rather have it implemented. I'd much rather have a good relationship. I'd much rather follow up with them, you know, on a regular basis, and maybe come in and tweak that solution later on when the environment changes. And I feel much better doing that when I've charged a reasonable amount. And
so for people in that situation, I think something that's hard, assuming they've gotten the proposal off and they think they have the right price on it, and then they hear you're too expensive. And then they panic. And they freak out, and the first thing they want to do is say, okay, well, we'll make it cheaper. Not, oh, that's a great sign. They really want to buy from me. They're bothering to object to my price. Yeah. So what should people do in that situation?
Well, I think the key is that when they say your price is too much, that's relative. It's a relative terminology. You know, it's not absolute. So so my first response when somebody says your price is too much, I say, oh, did I misunderstand the problem? I thought this was, in our case, we've been talking about $1 million problem. And when we talked about it in person, that's what you said it was. But it sounds like maybe you don't really think it's that big a problem. Has something changed? Is it smaller now? Do we need a smaller engagement as a result? And if you think of it in those relative terms, you know, they may say, "Oh no, the problem is exactly what we talked about. It's really this $1 million problem, but we just don't really want to pay you $100,000." You know, it's like, well, help me understand how you believe this problem is real, and the outcome can be that massive, and you don't feel like you really want to pay for the solution, you know?
Well, and I'll say I think there's a scenario where that's a legitimate complaint by the buyer, right? They say, we've got someone else that we've worked with in the past who we trust, who says they can do it for $75,000. You sound good too, but why should we pay an extra $25,000?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an impossible scenario, and in those, I tend to call bluff more than buy into it. And in a lot of cases, it is a bluff. If you have worked with somebody before and they charge less than me and you like them and trust them, why haven't you already hired them? Like, I'm not going to play a game of, look, I'm the new guy and I'm going to displace them. If you really do like them and trust them, work with them. You know, like, I'm not here to, like, if we haven't worked together before, there's no reason that you should pick me over Adam, right? It's like you're saying earlier about, you know, there are plenty of charlatans, there are plenty of people who can't deliver. And if you've got somebody that's delivered for you consistently, why are we talking?
Right.
And I find that usually when I come back with that, they'll say, well,
right.
You know, he's not exactly available. Right. Or, you know, well, the last time he actually bungled the project and we don't really want to work with him anymore, but this is what his pricing was like. You know, there's always a catch. They wouldn't talk to you if there wasn't a catch.
Right. I think that's a great point. And I think all of us have almost trained everyone to ask for a discount because it works so often. And why wouldn't you? Right? I ask for a discount sometimes when I'm like, I think that I should get this for less. Let me see. Or my buddy says, hey, if you call them up and tell the cable company you're going to switch or whatever.
Right.
Right? And you're like, well, why wouldn't I do that? Mm-hmm. But when push comes to shove, if I'm climbing up Everest, I need the appropriate Everest tent. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm doing a project for my business, which is sort of the equivalent of heart surgery on my business, I want the surgery to go well. I don't want the cheapest surgeon. Mm-hmm. There's limits to how much you can charge based on what you're doing, but to your point, the risk and the value are much more important than the price. And I think it's very easy for us to get hung up on the number because that feels like the one piece we can control. Mm-hmm. But in actuality, like you said, there's a lot of different ways to handle those objections that don't involve you just dropping your price.
Right. And it's worth noting that if you get to that point where we're talking about pushback on price, it's likely that there's a whole string of events prior to this that you may not have executed as well around, first identifying that pain and quantifying that pain.
Right.
If you didn't quantify that it's $1 million problem, then you're much more likely to get pushed back on price. And it's much harder to come back and say, well, I thought this was $1 million problem when you never established that in the first place. And
you said it was a really big problem, but you never said how big. I thought it was $1 million. Well, it's not, right?
Right. And I find one of the things a really simple thing I learned long ago that I think is tremendous in this process is to ask a customer, why are we talking? Why do you think that I'm worth having a conversation with or I'm worth proposing? What do you see that I can bring to the table that's valuable?
Right.
And when you understand that, it gives you so much ammunition when they say, well, the price. And you say, well, you told me I was the only person you're talking to that you think could solve this. And now we're going to have this conversation. It gives you so much more ammunition when you understand what those rationales are. It might be timing in a lot of cases, our other solution is going to take 6 months before they can even start on it, so they're basically disqualified. Well, now you're the only bidder. Don't be like an NBA team and bid against yourself for players. That always drives me crazy when sports teams do that, right? But it's like they're the only suitor for a player and they just overpay them because they want to, because the agent's really good. And so often...
Well, when we have that much money, who knows? We'll be
right.
Around. It's a whole different story.
Sure. But the same thing happens where, if you don't pay attention to who else is involved in the process, and sometimes they can be somewhat tight-lipped about it, but if you ask them, how are we different, you start to get a feel of, how many others are in the process, because they'll often say, well, you have more experience than some, or, and we think your price is a bit better than others and your timing is right compared to others. Well, now I know that there are at least 3 other people. But in most cases, it might just be one or even none.
Right.
And they kind of tip their hand when they give you the rationale. If you say, what do you like about us or what's different, and they can't give you anything, and they just say, well, I don't know, we just really like you. It probably means there's nobody else in the process. Right. There's nobody to compare you to.
Someone referred you or something like
that.
Right.
Right. And there's nobody else bidding. And when that's the case, I'm very slow to reduce price or to really negotiate hard, because I recognize I'm just negotiating against myself. This isn't going to go away and go to somebody else.
I think that's a great point, and it kind of reminds me, I actually did a project last year where they described what they wanted me to do, and the guy describing the problem could clearly solve the problem. He was smart. He knew way more about the market than I did. I'm coming in as an outsider. And I said, all this makes sense, and it sounds cool, and you seem cool, and I'd love to work with you, but why? Mm-hmm. Why don't you just do this or put it on someone on your team to do it? And he said, we're all on a plane all month. And we've been trying to do this for 2 years, and we haven't, and blah, 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 blah. And so we just need to freaking get it done. Mm-hmm. And so that was what I needed, not just to win the deal, but to understand how to serve them properly and make them successful, was knowing, hey, it's not that I'm some rocket scientist genius. It's just literally that they're on a plane all the time and they have all this other stuff, and this is like this thing that keeps falling off the plate. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, a lot of the projects that people get brought in to deal with are like that, right? Mm-hmm. If it was absolutely on the core path, someone would have been hired to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And this might be, it's kind of just on the side and it's blocking the core path so they can't get by, but they don't want to hire someone to solve it, or they don't want to implement software to solve it or whatever. They just want someone to come in and get it out of the way. Yeah. So for folks who come in, they've got this technical background, maybe they started a company, maybe they've grown to sort of managerial or executive level where they're more customer facing. What should they do? I know you mentioned reaching out for help, just admitting that you don't know something, which I think is a great first step. Mm-hmm. Are there specific tactics or resources that you would recommend?
from a tactic standpoint, this is something that works really well for me, and I find for anybody who's not pathological, it tends to help as well. Is that I try to occupy a space in a sales process where I'm trying to problem solve for them and try to help the customer as much as I possibly can, and I try to assume the best about them in that process.
Okay.
And that leads to a series of questions and a series of stances that tends to be incredibly helpful at opening up and figuring out the problem and then providing solutions. So I'll talk about that philosophically, and then I could mention some resources later. So there's I tend to take this tack of aggressive help. So explain your problem to me. Explain why you can't do it yourself. Because I assume that you're intelligent. I don't necessarily know you that well, but why do I have skills that you don't, or why can I be helpful? Why do you believe that's the case, and you can't just do it yourself? Why does this need to be done now? Is there no way to work around this and not have to do the work? Because as a business owner myself, I'd much rather just, like you're saying, if it's not in core, I'd rather just not do it.
Right.
And work around
solution.
it. Right. And the more you ask these questions, the more they describe a scenario to you on why this is critical. Because let's be honest, nobody talks to consultants for fun, right? Nobody picks up the phone and calls and just says, Ruben, I just want to, maybe there's a project here. Can you just poke through my business and figure out ways to improve it, right? You ever had a call like that?
No.
Yeah, me neither. They only call because there's something painful. There's something that's keeping them up at night. There's something that's driving them crazy. And the more that you can understand that how get empathetically into their shoes and understand how painful that is to them, the easier it is to then be able to help them solve the problem. And even in that process, when you were talking earlier about, we have this other guy that we trust that charges less, my response in a completely honest way is then use him. And if that happens, they say, okay, well then we will. Great. You solved the problem. It's your problem is solved. Your business is moving forward. I recognize I don't need to be the solution to every problem.
Right.
And it's helpful in that it builds trust. People that I've done that with will come back and want work later. Sometimes not. I don't really do it for that reason, but I recognize that it creates it creates good relationships. It creates good things. And really what I seek to do is become friends with people in a way. It's if I'm talking to you, I want to help you out. I want to see you do well. And if I can be involved in some way and it makes sense for both parties, great, let's do that. And then everyone wins. And if not, at least we made a connection. Maybe I've helped you out, I hope. If not, then let's minimize this and waste as little time as possible and let you get about your life and about your day. That mentality was really hard for me because when I first engaged with sales, I thought of it as a used car salesman, forcing people into things they didn't want. And when I started to realize that it really is just like that. The best salesperson is a mom, right? I won't say your mom because it depends on the person, but when you have a mom in your life that's oh no, you need to do this thing because they really care about you and they're trying to think about what you need to do, and obviously that can bring some connotations that might not be as great, nagging or whatever else. But the point is that they're very adamant, they're very determined. They want to see that you get the best,
right, and
that everything is taken care of for you. And if you take somewhat of that perspective of just saying, okay, there's a problem, how can we help? How can I? And if it involves me, great. If it doesn't, great. If I get paid, awesome. If I don't, as long as your problem is solved, everything's going to work out well. I find that attitude has been incredibly helpful for both business, but also personally, just making friends through the process and enjoying what I do a whole lot more than trying to force somebody to buy something or trick them into, picking the right solution.
And it kind of goes back to your initial Princeton Review experience where you didn't realize you were selling people. You're just trying to help them make the right decision.
Yeah.
And if the right decision was for them to sign up, great. If it wasn't, they can go somewhere else. As long as their problem is solved, fine.
Yeah.
And you were maybe blessed with not carrying a quota. Were you carrying a quota?
Functionally, yes. We needed to. The first site that I was at was actually in danger of getting shut down if we didn't increase sales. But I couldn't approach it in a selfish way and be well, no, I need you to sign up because I need to, keep the site open or make my number or whatever. I just am not wired that way.
So I think that's an interesting segue that we weren't planning to go to, but I think a lot of the challenge people have is Sure, if I had a booming business and I was turning away work, of course it would be really easy for me to be helpful and be a trusted advisor and blah, 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 blah. But darn it, I'm struggling and I need every deal and I'm worried about making payroll and this, that, and the other thing. Sort of puts people in that scarcity mindset. And then it's like everything is kind of like you're one guy in Chicago, right? Everything is bad.
Right.
And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there are times when things are bad that you have no control over. So if you end up in that situation, whether it's random or you just wake up one day and realize you made a bunch of mistakes, what do you do to kind of, I guess, pull that locus of control back inside yourself?
Yeah, I mean, scarcity is like the belief that you're in an environment of scarcity is one of the most debilitating mental states to be in. It shuts you down. It shuts down creation opportunities. And really, especially in a sales role, people can smell it on you. They smell desperation, right? It's like the deals that when you absolutely feel like you have to have it, they never come through, right? That's been my experience.
Or if they do, you have the discount. And
something terrible, yeah. You end up selling your soul to make the deal work. And it's completely because your head's in the wrong space, and the way that you write about it, the way you talk. I mean, it's like people say, in an interview, it's the first 5 seconds they decide if they're going to hire you or not. It's the same thing in sales. Like if you seem desperate or you seem shifty or you seem anxious, it makes them anxious. We mirror other people's emotions, and it makes them feel like something might be wrong in the process. And it really just might be that you're worried about making payroll. You're worried about whatever else it is. I've had plenty of situations where in starting businesses or being a consulting firm where I haven't paid myself, and I've even written checks out of my personal account to pay like payroll because
I've done that too.
Yeah, right. You have to, and at the same time, you're selling because you're selling. The only way out of this is to make a sale,
right?
And I know, I just explained to my wife that I need to write this check out of our personal account, and then I need to go jump on the phone and do this conference call to close a deal. And that's a hard mental thing to keep compartmentalized. But it's really critical to recognize that that it is going to work out, that you can have faith that things do work out for good, and you just have to trust that as you jump on. I call it, and trust that if you approach it with abundance, that you approach it with what's the word I'm looking for? With abundance, with just openness, that something will work, and it might. It's always, I'm sure you've seen this as well, but when you're in this situation, you have this one deal that you're like, this is the deal that'll make it happen. You're jumping on the call, you're trying to get it done, and it's just going sideways, and they give you the 2 more weeks thing. It's always 2 weeks, right? They're like, oh no, we got to delay for 2 weeks because whatever, fill in the blank. And then like the next day, something comes out of left field and it's like, oh, hey, we heard about you. We need to start tomorrow, we're ready to go. And you're like, oh, it did work out. It just came from a different perspective than I expected. And I find that it's probably one of the harder things to do is maintain that perspective of abundance and of just openness. But without it, I just don't know that you can be successful.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think it's hard because depending on where you are and what situation you're in, your immediate environment may or may not be abundant, right? You may have landed yourself in a non-abundant environment. And all your thoughts about, hey, this is not good, are actually accurate. Right. But you need to change the environment, not just say, okay, I can't control anything.
Well, you say accurate, and that's true from a perspective.
Right.
Like everything's perspective-based, right? And in business school, one of our professors made a comment that stuck with me about variable and fixed costs. He said, on a short enough time scale, everything is fixed.
Right.
And on a large enough time scale, everything is variable.
Right.
So you have to be aware of what your time scale is, which blew my mind at the time. And I think of it in this way as well. Like one way that I try to maintain that is I don't believe that scarcity is accurate at all. It can be in a very acute way and short term, but if you expand your perspective and you look back over 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. If you have enough skill to be both technical and in a sales role, you clearly have been successful at something in your life to this point. You clearly can trust that you have economic value. And unless you just completely shut down on yourself and shut down on the world, you have a long time to make money. And to balance this out. And this might be an acute period, but you're not starving. I don't know many people in America who are missing meals, especially that will likely be listening to this podcast. Technical people that do sales, their families don't miss meals, right? Like you're not getting your house repossessed. Like these things typically are not happening, but it feels the same to us, right? It's like I'm worried that we're gonna have to take out a loan to pay our bills, or this month we're gonna have to pay on credit cards, and like when you're faced with those things, it feels like scarcity. You feel like everything's falling apart. But if you scale back a little bit, you're like, wait, like our family's never missed a meal. We're not getting evicted from our house. We're not, none of this is happening. And if I look over a 5 or 10 year horizon, this is certainly like a blip in the radar and is not really going to be significant. And I know that things are going to work out over that type of scale. Over the next 2 weeks, I don't know, maybe it could get worse, right? But it's going to get better. It just is. Like there's not with the right time scale, it all kind of fits in and makes sense.
Well, I think you alluded to something important, right? There's the people who are likely to be listening to this have a different set of problems than the average American, let alone the average person around the world.
Right.
But a lot of folks are saying, well, okay, great. I know that I will make this business, quote unquote, work, but it's not the next Facebook and I'm not the next Mark Zuckerberg. Therefore, this all sucks. And right, they have their own just incredibly statistically impossible threshold for success that they're never going to meet. And so even though things are going reasonably well, they still have a scarcity mindset because they still feel like things are not good. And I don't think there's anything you can do if your threshold for success is, I need to start the next Facebook. Because Mark didn't think that when he started Facebook. He just went and did it, and it turned out to be the next Facebook. But you alluded to a couple things earlier. You said you ask a bunch of questions to really open up the conversation, and you were going to give some specific tactics. And I segued you off. So I want to get to those questions and tactics because I think that'll be super useful for people.
Yeah. We talked through some of the questions. I mean, like the tactics we talked through some of the questions and tactics. I think a great places to look, like something I've actually had a lot of success with. I could mention a lot of sales books, but I imagine a lot of people will mention sales books in general. One thing that I found to be super insightful is books about interviewing. There's one by Barbara Walters a while back that I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but it was like just her history as a reporter and and as you read through it, like the way that she asks questions is just super insightful. And if you start to look at journalists, I think journalists are one of the best parallels to entrepreneurs, because you start out with a vague idea of where you're headed, and you have to go in, especially sales-oriented entrepreneurs, right? So you have to go in and you have to get the story and make the story happen. And their only weapon is questions.
Right.
They get to present some facts, but for the most part, it's all questions.
Right. And
so I find that, anything in that direction. I listen to Planet Money is one of my favorite podcasts, and it's reporters talking about financial things. And sometimes they'll just listening to the way they ask questions, the way they structure questions, they get to the heart of the issue so quickly. And that it's such a skill. It's such an art form. And if you're not good at asking questions, that's okay. Like, it's not something that comes naturally to you. You have to actually practice and learn and test. And so I'll often do that. I'll read articles, like major profiles or interviews. I'll listen to interviews, and I'm thinking about, okay, what is the sequence of questions? Where are they headed? How are they getting there? How are they doing it Socratically, right? Without driving or telling somebody what they want to know or what they want to hear. They're actually just guiding them there through the way they ask questions, asking open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, right? It's like all these kind of more nuanced techniques in that process that I think make a huge difference in an actual sales process.
I think that notion of open-ended questions, at least for me personally, that was a huge revelation. I don't know why, but it's like you go out there and you're selling widgets, so you ask everyone if they need widgets. If they say yes, you assume you got the deal. If you say no, you ask them why they don't need widgets, and then eventually you leave. As opposed to what are you trying to do and why is that important, and so on, and just let them tell you. And then if it turns out to be a good fit, they've basically written a proposal for you, and they're going to sign it because you get exactly what they're saying. Versus if you check the box and say, well, they needed widgets, I don't know why they're not signing this deal or why I'm getting price pushback. And it seems so obvious now, but at the time it was very much like, I'm selling widgets. Do they need widgets?
Right, and in that initial framework, I'd really just say it's interesting because the most powerful question is applied the wrong way, right? It's if they say they need widgets, you say, they check yes and you go. They don't, you ask them why. I'd flip that.
Right.
If they say they need widgets, why do you need widgets? Like, what are you doing with these things? And if they say no, say, okay, cool.
Right.
I'm moving on to the next customer. Like, I don't want to spend time with somebody that doesn't need what I have to offer. And it's when you find out what they're actually doing with it, that's when it becomes such a more rich experience. And it's not taking orders. It becomes really consulting, really helping, advising, and so much less just searching for people that are willing to take what you have to sell.
And not only do your sales results get better, but it kind of goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. Like, your projects get better, they get more successful, and you just feel better because you're actually helping people with their real problems.
Right.
You're not just doing something on a checklist. You're actually fixing a problem. And so, any other tactics that you would suggest?
We were talking before the interview, just kind of level setting and figuring out each other's backgrounds. And you said something that really stuck with me about, like, it's really meaningful when you talk to a customer and they say, like, what did this do for you? And they say, oh, I was able to build a deck I've been wanting to build for 20 years, right? And it's not, it made me $1 million or maybe $50,000 probably in that case, right? It's not that it made them $50,000. That's not what made them excited. It's what they were doing with that money. And it kind of ties into this with a reporter of, like, digging for why. And the further you dig, the more meaningful it becomes, right? Nobody really wants money at the end of the day. Really what they want is they want to be happy. They want to spend time with their family. They want to be healthy, right? It's like all these universal things that we all share, and you're helping them get to those things. And that's when it becomes really meaningful and less about taking orders. And,
right. And it could just be, I want to make the same money, but I want to actually spend time with my family.
Right.
Like, I don't need to grow my business. I just need to actually leave at 5 o'clock. So I can keep promising that I will, kind of thing.
Right.
So I'm going to switch over real quick to the wine. It is starting to converge on the same taste. It's all opening up, but I can still tell a slight difference in glass number 3 here from the Venturi. So we'll put this in the show notes, but the Venturi wine, I don't know what you call it, decanter aerator or something like that. If you want a real quick way to enjoy, especially your inexpensive wine that you picked up from Costco, as I might be known to do, great investment. And we'll do some other test on the blender. Joe, anything else that people should know as they, especially if they're making the transition from a technical background into a business/sales and marketing background? All the advice you've given, especially going back to the very beginning, the price by looking at your comparison point and making it more expensive. Again, I'm just going to reiterate, do that. If you're at all confused, just start there. Anything else, or should we just leave it there? Because I think that was so brilliant.
Yeah, one thing I would say, especially in transition, there's I call it a curse of intelligent people or talented people. Okay. That you tend to underestimate the value you create on the things that come naturally to you. If you're good at math, or good at technical things, then you assume that everybody can figure it out if they just had some time. And it's really actually not true. Like, their minds are really different. I mean, some are more artistic, some are more, science, technology, some are more people and people intelligence, some physical intelligence, right? It's like there are multiple intelligences. And we tend to, whatever ways that we're gifted, we tend to think that they're not necessarily intrinsically valuable. And so part of what creates this problem for technical people in sales is that they'll go in and think, well, it's really not that hard to figure out this complicated solution that I have, and I'm going to explain to the customer, because if I just spent some time with them and they focused, they would fully understand what I'm saying, and they could make these decisions themselves. They could do this work themselves, and they don't really need me. Right. And it's really important to become empathetic in that process. And if you're selling to people that don't have the same level of technical knowledge, go spend some time doing something that's totally out of your element. If you don't know anything about cars, go try and buy a car. If you don't know about your camping equipment, go do that. If you don't know about, just pick something that buy something for your wife, right? It's completely out of your element. You're like, I have no idea what I'm doing here, right? And go through that experience and realize that's what your customers are going through, and pay attention to what you appreciate and don't appreciate in that sales process. And you'll find that the more that you emulate the things that you gravitate towards that make you feel more comfortable, that make you feel safe in that process, those are the things that you likely need to do with your customers. Not be so technical, not be so detail oriented, but be more understand, listen to their emotion, engage with them emotionally, understand that they're nervous, that they're scared, and then help them walk through that and let them know that it's going to be okay and that you can help them find a good solution.
I think that's a great point. And I think bringing it back to your own experiences where you have that same lack of clarity is really important, right? If you're buying a birthday present for your wife, which I'm about to do, right? It's like, it's not about choosing the right whatever it is. It's about, is she happy?
Right.
If I'm going camping, it's not about, does my tent have certain specs? It's about, did I actually get a good night's sleep and enjoy going camping and want to go again?
Exactly.
And whatever your customer's trying to do, they're trying to do something, and they may not tell you what it is first. They may just say, I want widgets. And to your point, you have to ask, well, why is that? And what are you really trying to do so they can be successful? Joe, thanks so much for your time. This has been awesome. We'll have a bunch of stuff in the show notes, from how to get a Venturi to Barbara Walters' book, whose title we have to now look up. It seems like journalism is a dying breed, but maybe go check that out. And again, thanks for your time.
Thank you.